Hello learners, welcome back to our STEM Pathway channel. In today's lesson, we are going to explore the 32 basic apparatus commonly used in the laboratory. These are the essential tools that every student must know because they help us carry out experiments safely and accurately. We will go through each apparatus one by one, looking at its name, structure, and functions. And by the end of this video, you should be able to identify them easily and understand their uses during practical work. So let's get started and discover the important tools that make science experiments possible. So the first instrument that we're going to discuss is a burette. And a burette is defined as a long graduated glass tube with a tap at the bottom. So in this case, what we have here is what we call a tap. And the function of this tap is to control the amount of liquid flowing out of the burette. So in this case, most burettes have a scale ranging from 0 to 50 cubic centimeter, but sometimes we can have burettes with a scale ranging from 0 to 25 cubic centimeter, like the one that we have here on the screen. Now, what is unique about a burette is that it has 0 mark at the top, like in this case this is 0 cubic centimeter. Then the scale increases down this 1 cubic centimeter like that up to the bottom here where we have the maximum value, like in this case 25 cubic centimeter. So contrary to other instruments which have 0 marks at the bottom, then the scale increases up. The burette, the 0 mark is at the top, then the scale increases downwards. Now the function of this burette is to measure accurate volumes of liquids in the laboratory. Now the reason why it measures accurate volumes is because it has a tap which can control the amount of the liquid flowing out. The second apparatus is a pipette, and a pipette is a slender graduated glass or plastic tube, and it's used to measure and transfer fixed volume of liquids accurately. So a pipette has its capacity indicated on its side. This is what we call the capacity, the amount of liquid that this pipette can hold, and this capacity is reached when the liquid inside is filled up to this mark. This mark we have here shows where the liquid should reach, and when the liquid is at that point, then its volume or its capacity is equals to the one written on the side of a pipette. Like in this case, the capacity of this pipette up to that mark is 50 milliliters. So this pipette is used to measure accurate volumes or fixed volumes of liquids in the laboratory. Just like a burette, this one also is used to measure accurate and fixed volumes of the liquid in the lab. The third apparatus is a volumetric flask, and a volumetric flask is a flat-bottomed glass container with a long narrow neck and a single calibration mark. So for you to identify a volumetric flask, first it should have a flat bottom like this one, and then second it should have a very long and narrow neck. This is what we call a neck. It's very long and narrow. And then thirdly, it should have a single calibration mark. So this mark indicates the volume or the level at which, if the volume is at that point, then it's equal to the capacity of the volumetric flask. And as usual, the volume or the capacity of the volumetric flask is indicated on its side. Like in this case, the capacity is 250 milliliters. So in this case, if you fill your liquid up to this mark, then the volume of the liquid that will be inside here will be 250 milliliters. So we have other volumetric flasks with different capacities, like we have a 500 ml volumetric flask, we have a 1000 ml volumetric flask, we also have a 2000 ml volumetric flask. Now the function of this volumetric flask is to measure accurate and fixed accurate and fixed volumes of liquids in the laboratory. The fourth apparatus is a syringe, and a syringe is a plastic or a glass instrument with a plunger that draws in and pushes out liquid through a narrow nozzle. So the parts of this syringe is that it has a nozzle which is very narrow, and then it also has this part here which we call a plunger. So this plunger is the one, if you want to push the liquid out, you push it in. In this case, it will draw the liquid out of this syringe. And if you pull it in, if you pull this plunger in, then it's going to pull some liquid into the syringe. Now the function of this apparatus, which we call a syringe, is that it's used to measure accurately, transfer, or even inject small volumes of liquids in the lab. So just like a volumetric flask, just like a burette and a pipette, this syringe is also used to measure accurate volumes of liquids in the lab. The fifth apparatus is a conical flask, and a conical flask is a glass container with a broad flat base, sloping sides, and also a narrow neck. Like in this case, if you want to identify a conical flask, then the first thing that you have to look at is a flat base. Then another important thing that you have to look at is a sloping sides. This is what we call sloping sides. And also we also have what we call a narrow neck. So another important feature of this one is that most of them are calibrated and they have their capacity indicated on the side. Like in this case, you can see 250 ml. And another important thing is that this instrument is indicated that the volume that it can measure is approximate. So the main function of this instrument is that it's used to measure approximate volume of liquids in the laboratory, but again it can also be used to perform other general laboratory experiments like in mixing chemicals, heating, and even storing solutions. The sixth apparatus is a beaker, and a beaker is a simple cylindrical glass, or sometimes it can be plastic container with a flat bottom and a small spout for easy pouring of liquid out of the beaker. So in this case, if you want to identify a beaker, then it should have a flat base, and then it should have this part here which we call a spout, and the function of this spout is to help you to deliver a liquid out of the beaker easily. So this instrument has some scale on its side here, and then the most important thing is that it's written approx. So it means this instrument is used to measure approximate volume. So apart from measuring approximate volume, just like a conical flask, this instrument can also be used to perform other general laboratory experiments and functions like holding chemicals, mixing and heating chemicals in the lab. The seventh apparatus that we have is a measuring cylinder, and a measuring cylinder is a tall, narrow container with graduation marks along its length. So for you to identify a measuring cylinder, it should be tall and narrow. Another important thing is that it should be graduated, or it should have these calibrations which we call a scale on its length. Now the function of this instrument is that it's used to measure approximate volume of liquids in the lab. But what you need also to note is that this instrument is better, or is more accurate than the conical flask that we discussed and a beaker. Reason being is that this instrument is narrow, and when you have a narrow instrument, then it's more accurate. If you have a wide instrument, it's less accurate. So in this case, this measuring cylinder is more accurate than a beaker and a conical flask. However, it's very important to note that it is less precise than the first 4 instruments that we discussed. That was a burette, a pipette, a syringe, and a volumetric flask. Another apparatus that we have is a test tube, and a test tube is a small cylindrical glass tube with a round bottom and open at the top. So for you to identify a test tube, it should be small and cylindrical, and then it should have a round bottom, and then it should be open at the top. So that is the feature of a test tube. And then the function of this test tube is that it's used for general lab experiments like holding. It can be used in holding. It can also be used in heating, and again it can be used in mixing. It can be used in holding, heating, and mixing small amount of substances during experiments. Another apparatus that we have is a boiling tube, and a boiling tube is a large thick-walled test tube made of heat-resistant glass. So a boiling tube looks exactly like a test tube. The only difference is that it is thick-walled. The walls of the boiling tube are thick, and another thing is that the glass which is used to make a boiling tube is heat-resistant. It cannot crack easily when exposed to heat. Now the function of this boiling tube is that it is used to hold substances when heating during experiments. So like you can see on the screen, on the other side here, we have a boiling tube. This is the boiling tube, and then this is a flame. Then when you want to heat a substance, you just bring the substance inside the boiling tube close to the flame of a Bunsen burner, and in this case the substance can be heated without the boiling tube cracking because the glass which makes it is heat resistant. Another apparatus is a test tube rack, and a test tube rack is a stand which is usually made of wood, plastic, or even a metal, and it has holes. Now these holes hold the test tubes and boiling tubes upright, and the essence of holding these boiling tubes and test tubes upright is to ensure that they are organized and it prevents them from rolling or breaking, and sometimes it helps in a safe handling of these apparatus during the experiment. Now these large holes, like this one we have called 1 and the other one here 2, they are used to hold boiling tubes. This one is used to hold boiling tubes because they are large, and then the middle one are used to hold test tubes. This one are used to hold test tubes. So the large one hold boiling tubes while the smaller one hold test tubes. Another apparatus that we have is a clamp and stand. Sometimes this clamp and stand is referred to as a retort stand. So this one is a metal stand with a very heavy base and adjustable clamps. So in this case, this is what we call a very heavy base, and then we have adjustable clamp. This is what we call a clamp. Then this is what we call a stand. Now the reason why it has a very heavy base is that to give the stand stability so that it does not topple off during experiment. And then this clamp here, this way, if you have a test tube, you just place it inside this clamp, and then you adjust until it just grip the apparatus so that it avoid falling off. So in this case, the function of this clamp and stand, or a retort stand, is to hold and support pieces of apparatus during experiment. This apparatus can be, like in this case you see on the screen, we can have apparatus which it can hold like test tubes and boiling tubes. We can have flasks, and even burettes and many other apparatus which needs to be supported. Another apparatus is a dropper. Sometimes we call it a teat pipette, and this one is a small glass or plastic tube with rubber bulb at one end. For you to identify a dropper, it should have a bulb which is made up of rubber at one end, and then of course it should be made of either glass or plastic tube. And the function of this is that it is used to pick up or release liquids drop by drop during experiments. Like in this case, for you to pick up a liquid, then you have to dip this dropper inside the liquid, and then you place this bulb so that the liquid can be picked or sucked into the dropper. And if you want to release the liquid, like you can see on the other diagram here, then you have to press this bulb so that the liquid can be dropped. It can be released in terms of drops into the other solutions during experiments. Another set of apparatus is a beam balance and an electric balance. So for the first one here is what we call a beam balance, and then the second one here we call it an electric balance. The two are used to measure mass of substances, but in a very different way. Like in the first case here with the beam balance, this one is a mechanical instrument and it has two pans. This one has two pans, this is a pan, and this one is also a pan. And in this case, it's used to measure the mass of substances by comparing them with non-standard weights. So in this case, for you to measure the mass of a substance, you have to place a substance here of known mass. This one is of known mass, and then you have to add another substance here until it balances off. So in that case, you will know the mass that you have. For the second one, which is an electric balance, this one is a digital instrument. That's why you can see it has a digital scale here. This is a scale. So it's a digital instrument that quickly and accurately measures the mass of substances and it displays the reading on the scale. So once you have a substance you want to measure its mass, you place it on top of this, which we call a pan, and then once the substance is on top of the pan, then its mass is going to be accurately and precisely be displayed on this screen. Another apparatus that we have is a thermometer, and a thermometer is an instrument which is used to measure temperature of substances in the lab, and most of the time the thermometers that we have are calibrated in Celsius degrees. So a thermometer has different parts. Like in this case down here we have what we call a bulb, and the function of the bulb is to hold a thermometric liquid. So the liquid inside here is known as a thermometric liquid, and then we have a scale which is also always in the laboratory thermometers. It's in a Celsius scale, and then we have a capillary pore inside. So this instrument, if you want to measure the temperature of a substance, then you have to dip this bulb inside the substance that you want to measure its temperature, and then you read the scale. Another apparatus that we have is a round bottomed flask, and a round bottomed flask is a glass container with a spherical bottom and a long neck. Now for you to identify a round bottomed flask, therefore it must have a spherical bottom, and then at the same time it must have a long neck. Now the reason why it has a spherical bottom is that this shape allows even distribution of heat on a wide area below the flask, hence reducing the risks of breaking of the container. Remember, this flask is made up of glass, and the glass is a poor conductor of heat. Therefore, if heat is not distributed on a large area, it will be concentrated at one point and making it to crack. Therefore, for this purpose, this instrument is used in heating substances, and this is because heat supplied uniformly so that the flask does not crack as it expands. Another apparatus that we have is a flat bottomed flask, and a flat bottomed flask is a glass container with a flat base and a long neck. So for you to identify a flat bottomed flask, then you must look at the flat base. This is a flat base, and then this one here is a long neck. Now, the main difference between a flat bottomed flask and a round bottomed flask that we have just discussed is that a flat bottomed flask, this one here, has a flat base, while a round bottomed flask had a round or spherical base. Now this one is used for heating, but if you have to use it when heating, since the base is flat, then you have to use it together with a wire gauze. If you have to use it for heating, you must use it together with a wire gauze. But of course, it's also used in other general laboratory experiments like mixing chemicals and also storing liquids. Another apparatus that we have is an evaporating dish, and an evaporating dish is a shallow, heat-resistant ceramic dish which is used on heating solutions to evaporate a liquid and leaving behind a solid. So mostly this one we use it especially when we are separating substances by evaporation method, where we place the solution inside the evaporating dish, like you can see on this right side of the screen, where when you heat, the water in the mixture will evaporate and it will leave behind the solid, which you can cool and collect as crystals. Another apparatus that we have is a spatula, and a spatula is a small, flat, spoon-like tool made of metal. Sometimes it can be made of porcelain, and this instrument is used to scoop, transfer, or sometimes mix solid chemicals in the lab. So like you can see in this case, we have the first chemical here on the right side of the screen, which is white. We also have another chemical here, which is black, and we have a blue chemical here, let's call it 3. And this blue chemical number 3 is scooped by this spatula. This is what we call a spatula from this container here. Now when this chemical has been placed into this evaporating dish, then you can still use the same spatula to mix the 3 substances. So in this case, it can be used to scoop, transfer, and sometimes mix solid chemicals. It can only be used to mix solid chemicals in the lab. Another apparatus that we have is a wire gauze, and a wire gauze is a square sheet of a metal mesh which is used together with a tripod stand to support containers during heating. Apart from supporting the containers, another important function of this apparatus is that it distributes heat evenly when heating substances in beakers and flasks. Now, another important thing that you have to note is that this wire gauze is placed between the tripod stand and the container that you want to heat substances in. Now, the reason why it's placed in between is that it can distribute heat on a wide area of the container so that to avoid the container from cracking. Another important apparatus that we have is a Libby condenser, and a Libby condenser is a long glass tube with an inner tube for vapor and also an outer jacket for circulating cold water. And this one is mainly used to distribute cold water to condense vapor back into liquid state. For you to identify a Libby condenser, then it must have this inner, this is what we call an inner tube which carries vapor, and then it must have the outer jacket which contains cold water, and the function of this cold water is to cool the vapor which is in the inner tube back into liquid state, which we are going to call a distillate in distillation process. So this Libby condenser has 2 main parts. It has this lower part here which we call the cold water in. It allows cold water to come in, and then it has this upper part here which we call hot or warm water out. So this one allows warm water to move out after it has cooled the vapor. So it carries the heat which was contained in the vapor out, while this tube down here brings in cold water which should supply coldness to the vapor to change it to liquid state. So this apparatus is used especially in distillation, either fractional distillation or simple distillation. Like on the screen here, we have a simple distillation setup. We have a simple distillation setup. It's a simple distillation because it does not have a fractionating column. So this one is a simple distillation, but the most important is that we have a Liebig condenser here. Now this Liebig condenser will cool the vapor which is generated when the flask with these constituents is heated. Now when vapor is formed, it travels through the Liebig condenser, it gets cooled into liquid state, and we will collect it here as a distillate. We will collect it here as a distillate. So these are very important instrument in distillation. Another apparatus that we have here is a defragrating spoon. And a defragrating spoon is a small metal spoon with a very long handle. So if you need to identify a defragrating spoon, it looks exactly like what we have here on the screen. This is a small spoon which is metallic, and of course it has a very long handle. Now the function or the use of this defragrating spoon is that it's used to hold solid substances while you are heating them in a flame, or when you are introducing them into a gas jar for combustion experiments. Another apparatus that we have is a filter funnel. And a filter funnel is a conical glass. Sometimes it can be made of plastic, and it has a very narrow stem. So this one here is a conical in shape, and then it has a stem. This is a stem which is very narrow. So this is how a filter funnel looks like. So the function or the use of this filter funnel is that it is used to deliver liquids carefully into the vessels. Apart from that, it can also be used together with a filter paper to separate solids from liquids during filtration. Remember, filtration process, you have to use a filter paper, and then you insert that filter paper inside a filter funnel. So it serves two purposes: delivering liquids carefully into vessels like you can see on the screen, and sometimes to separate solid liquid mixture in a process called filtration. Another apparatus that we have is a mortar and pestle. So this one is a pair of tools. This is what we call a pestle, and then this is what we call a mortar. Now the function of this mortar and pestle is that it is used in crushing, grinding, or even mixing solid substances into small particles. We use this one mostly in what we call solvent extraction as one way of separating substances, and we can also use it in preparation of a flour extract as our base acid indicators. Apparatus is a tripod stand, and a tripod stand is a three-legged metal stand which is used to support containers such as beakers and flasks during heating with a Bunsen burner. So for you to identify a tripod stand, it must have three legs. This 1, 2, and 3. Now this one is used to support. It's used to support beakers, and it can also be used to support flasks during heating using a Bunsen burner. Like in this case, we have our Bunsen burner here. Then we have this as our tripod stand, and then in between here we have a wire gauze. Which is used to distribute heat evenly. Therefore, it's used to support this beaker. Another apparatus that we have is tongs. Tongs are metal tools shaped like scissors or even pliers, and this one are used to safely hold corrosive or very hot solids during experiments. Another one is a thistle funnel. A thistle funnel is a long glass tube with a wide funnel-shaped top and a narrow stem. So if you want to identify a thistle funnel, it has a very wide and then a funnel-shaped top, and then it has a very narrow stem, and it is used for delivering liquids carefully into the reaction vessels during experiments. Another apparatus that we have is a separating funnel. So a separating funnel is a pear-shaped glass container with a tap at the bottom and a stopper at the top. So for you to distinguish between this separating funnel, and a dropping funnel, is that a separating funnel has a tap at the bottom, and then it has a stopper at the top, and therefore this one is used to separate immiscible liquids. Immiscible liquid mixtures, these are mixtures, all immiscible liquids, these are liquids which does not mix. A good example in this case is oil and water. Like you can see on the right side of the screen, we have oil and we have water. And the reason why it's possible for us to collect or to separate these substances is because they have different densities. Like you can see, water is at the bottom, then oil is at the top. Therefore, it means water has high density, then oil has low density. Therefore, in this case, if you open your tap, the water will drop into this beaker, leaving behind oil. And in this case, that makes a separating funnel a perfect apparatus for separating immiscible liquids which cannot mix. Another apparatus that we have is a wash bottle. A wash bottle is a squeezable plastic container with a very narrow nozzle. So this apparatus we call a wash bottle. It has this which we call a nozzle. This is a nozzle, and it's very narrow. And then this bottle is made of plastic. It's made of plastic. That's why it is squeezable. You can squeeze it. And the function or the use of this wash bottle is that it's used to hold water, and this water is used for rinsing. Remember, when you are performing experiments, if you are done with the first set of experiment and you want to perform the second one, then you have to rinse your apparatus. For you to rinse your apparatus to avoid contamination, then you use water, and the water that you use are contained in a wash bottle. Apart from that, this apparatus, which we call a wash bottle, is used in adding water into vessels with a very narrow neck. Another apparatus is a test tube holder. A test tube holder is a small metal, or sometimes it can be a wooden tool, which is used to hold single test tubes. It's only used to hold single test tubes, especially when heating over a flame or when it is too hot to touch. So this instrument, it has a handle which is made of wood, and then this one is a metallic, and then it's used, like you can see in the second diagram here, to hold a test tube. And this one you can hold it either when you are heating on an open flame or when the test tube is too hot for you to hold with your hands. Another one is a trough. A trough is a wide open container, usually made of glass. Sometimes it can be made of a plastic, and it's used to hold water or other liquids. Now in the lab, most of the time it is used for holding water in experiments, especially when you are collecting gas over water. Like in this case, if we want to collect hydrogen gas, you collect it by over water method, and in this case the trough, this is what we call a trough down here, which is used to hold the water during this experiment. Another important apparatus in a lab is a microscope, and a microscope is an optical instrument with lenses that helps us to magnify small objects. A microscope has different parts which we will discuss later. It has an eyepiece, it has a body tube, it has a revolving nose piece, it has an objective lens, it has a condenser, a mirror, a base, an inclination joint, it has a fine adjustment knob, and also a coarse adjustment knob. Now the function of this microscope is to magnify image of an object that is too small to be seen with the naked eyes. Now this one allows for detailed observation and the study of minute or very small structures and organisms. And the last one for this lesson is a Bunsen burner. And a Bunsen burner is a small gas burner with adjustable air holes. Now, the role of this apparatus is that it produces hot and clean flames, especially the non-luminous flames, which are used for heating and even combustion in the lab and other experiments which requires heating.